James Whale on 1089 and 1053 AM. Your team leader, Talk Sport.
Good evening to you. Yes, the James Whale Radio Show. Welcome to the program. I'm depressed about that, and I'm depressed about the weather. I'm cold, it's damp, and all these sort of bits hurt. So maybe the next life is even better. You never know. You never know. A lot of people, of course, don't believe there's anything else. They think we're just here, and that's it. But 3 years ago, Ash, I'll tell you when to turn the microphones on and what to do. You just have to listen to me, understood? 3 years ago, two doctors set out on an experiment that they hoped would change the world. For years, patients had been telling them that they'd experienced out-of-body experiences when they had clinically died. Dr. Panier and Dr. Fenwick, who's with me this evening, believed, but were unable to prove the existence was real. Together, they set out on a quest to find that proof. And in the course of their studies, they interviewed 63 survivors of cardiac arrest. All had died. They had no pulse, no respiration, and had fixed dilated pupils, all signals of clinical and therefore brain death. Yet 7 of the 63 reported emotions of peace and joy, visions of lights and mystical beings, and of coming to a point of no return. This despite the fact that their brains were no longer functioning. Now, Dr. Fenwick, who's with me in the studio, is going to tell us, I'm sure, about his research and the further experiences he hopes to conduct in the future with your help. And if you've had any of these near-death experiences, please call us tonight. We'll talk more to the callers in a little while, but Dr. Fenwick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, James.
Peter, first of all, I want to clear up a few things. I mean, I actually had what I thought was an out-of-body experience about 20-odd years ago at the dentist, and I've bored everybody stupid with this, so I'll just tell you what it is, and then I'll tell you what I think it was. I was just having a couple of fillings. They gave me some sort of gas. I don't know what it was. And during this, of course, it might have been a hallucination or a dream or whatever, I don't know, but during this, I suddenly found what I thought was myself, my spirit or whatever, trapped in a corner of the ceiling, right up against, I could feel I couldn't move, I was trapped against the ceiling. I was watching myself, thanking the dentist for the treatment, shaking his hand and leaving, by which time I was beginning to panic intensely, thinking for some reason I was out there not ever going to be getting, and made this enormous leap and ended up finding myself rolling around on the floor. Now, I don't know whether that was just a sort of a hallucination or whatever, but other people have expressed similar things.
Well, it sounds as if that was due to the nitrous oxide you were given, because that's the commonest gas which is given in dentistry, and I expect it was that. And one of the things that the brain can do, it can rerun the coordinates of where you are, and so if it wishes to put you on the ceiling, it can do so, and it does that. If you're given various types of drugs, or in this case, nitrous oxide or laughing gas. So I suspect that's what that was.
Although it felt to me incredibly real.
It would feel very real.
Yeah. Now, as a consultant neuropsychiatrist yourself, I mean, you're taking a bit of a risk, I think, with this subject, because people are likely to point the finger at you and start calling you all sorts of names, delving into this particular subject, aren't they?
They can do, but if you're going to go into this area, you have to do it properly. In other words, you've got to make sure that the science is correct. If the science is wrong, then people can point their fingers and say you're a lousy researcher. So you've got to keep your science good.
Okay. Now, my immediate thought of these people, and I've spoken to many, who say, you know, I saw this bright light, I saw this tunnel, I felt that I was going, etc., etc., etc. I'd come to the conclusion in my own mind that this must be what the brain does when, you know, when there's a situation where you're going to sort of end your life, that the brain then kicks in some kind of nice, I don't know what it is, some sort of feelings or vibrations that, and this is your sort of last dream before you go, if you like.
That's certainly one view. Now, there are reasons why that may not be correct. There are two sorts of near-death experiences. The first one, what you might call fear-death experiences. You're in a car crash, very frightened, and we have a number of people who have a near-death experience before the crash actually occurs. I had one woman who was spinning on the motorway. And during the spin on the motorway, when she was very frightened, she had a near-death experience. She was told it would be okay. She came back. The car hit her. She was okay. So that's one set of experiences. Now, they're very difficult to do anything with, because you can use your usual science and you can show that these experiences can be due to just an alteration in brain chemistry because you're frightened. Cultural factors will be very prominent. They can be any of those things. But the experiences which we looked at are quite different, and we chose them specifically so we can get away from all that. We can actually look at something new. What we did is we took people who were in a coronary care unit, and these people all had cardiac arrests. In other words, their heart stopped, as you said in your introduction, heart stopped, respiration stopped, brainstem stopped, fixed dilated pupils, and that is a sign of clinical death. And all these people, if they hadn't been interfered with, would have gone on, and it would have been irreversible. So there's no question about what state they were in. Now, when they were in that state, they said they had these experiences. The experiences they had are the usual type of near-death experiences. So then we were able to ask some really interesting questions. The first one was, when did these experiences occur? Because if they occurred when you were going unconscious, then that's not terribly interesting, because it's all brain chemistry again. If they occurred when you were coming back from unconsciousness, again, it's an alteration in brain chemistry. Now, for various reasons, we could say they didn't happen as you went down, they didn't happen as you came back. So when did they happen? And the suggestion is that they occurred when you were deeply unconscious. Now, we know quite a lot about unconsciousness. And one of the things we know is that if the heart stops and your blood pressure falls away, within 10 seconds, all electrical activity in your brain is over, finished, gone, done. You are, in fact, have a totally non-functioning brain.
Within 10 seconds?
Within 10 seconds, yeah.
I thought the brain could go on function for a long time.
No, there are two different ways we're talking about functioning. I'm talking about the ability of the brain to maintain conscious experience. That goes in 10 seconds.
Right, okay.
But the actual cells don't start dying until about 10 minutes. Actually, it's a little bit less. Between 5 and 10 minutes, the cells actually start dying. So it's this ability to construct a world. That's all gone. You're totally unconscious. And it looks as if the experiences were occurring during that time.
Right.
So then the question is, how can these experiences occur if the brain isn't functioning? Now, there's some data on that, because going back to your out-of-body experience, there are people who have left their bodies. We didn't have one in our series, but in other series there have been one. And they go up to the ceiling and they see the resuscitation process, and they can describe it very accurately. So they can get information when all those systems within the brain which create the world are down. So how can you then say that mind and brain are the same? Certainly highly correlated, but in this particular circumstance, they seem to be different, and that's really where we come from.
Now, as I understand it, I don't know anything about the brain, but as I understand it, even people like you know very little about the brain.
No. We like to think we know a bit, Jung.
Or maybe I should put it a different way. There's a large proportion of the amount of the brain that people are not sure what the function of it is, and we only use a smaller part of it anyway.
Take 2 points there. The first one is we only use a small part of it. No, not true. And if you work in a head injury unit, you can see that really even small amounts of cerebral damage quite often lead to really quite profound deficits. So the idea that we only use 10% or something like that isn't true. We use the whole lot, and we need it all. Now, how much do we know? Yes, you're right. In our current science, we know quite a bit about where various psychological characteristics are located. We know, for example, that where speech is, we know where vision is. We also know where that particular peculiar property of a mind to know a mind. We know what that sort of thing is. But how it all actually works, how consciousness comes into being, that we have no idea.
What then have you come to believe? I've read some of the articles that you did in some of the papers, And obviously, even allowing for some of the journalistic tendency to sort of glamorize it, obviously there's more about a human being than anybody understands, and you're beginning to, even scientists, people in the medical profession are beginning to feel that there may well be a soul as well. I mean, a lot of doctors pay lip service to a soul, but I don't think that many of them actually believe it. And it looks as if there may well be a part of the body, a sort of, there's a lot of electricity, I believe, in the human being, and a lot of functions going on that nobody can actually understand, that there may well be a bit of the body, a bit of this that's intangible, that people are now going to be able to investigate.
Well, it looks as if it's moving in that direction. What we, I think, were able to say was that there are some components of mind which don't seem to be totally dependent on the brain. Clearly they correlate with the brain, but they may not be the same thing as a brain.
Do you think this is dangerous for doctors to be involved in? I mean, do you think all those people who believe in spiritualism and everything else and follow the Bible, and they all, whether it's the Quran or the Bible or whatever else, they all seem to feel that we ought not to be delving into this too much. These are the realms of gods or whatever.
This is why I think it's terribly important that you use your science and you use it appropriately. Because one of the things which we've been doing is we've been following the data. This is what people say. And then we look at exactly what they say and then look at the physiological states and draw deductions from that. So we're not going into spirit realms or anything like that in the sense that one might think of it. But what we are doing is we're looking at where the data leads us.
Has it, I mean, are you yourself religious in any way?
If you offer me two choices about the world, either a random universe or one which is intelligent, I go for the intelligent one.
Okay. If you have had a near-death experience, or if there's something you'd like to talk to Dr. Peter Fenwick about, then call us now, 08700 40 50 60. The Horizon Research Foundation has set up, or been set up to collate information. And if you want to find out more about them, you can ring them on 0870 3333 722, I believe, and leave information. Also, this information is on the James Whale information page on the presenter profile section on our website, and you can check that out at talksport.net. But if you would like to talk to Dr. Peter Fenwick now, call us on 08700 40 50 60.
Right now, James Whale.
Okay, welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, we have a continuing quest on this program to find out what life is all about, whether there's anything out there. Are we about to be destroyed by a meteorite, and is there anything wrong with group sex? Tonight, we're actually talking about, well, where do we go after we die? Not with Derek Akora, of course. We should have got Derek on the show tonight. He would have been interesting. But my guest is Dr. Peter Fenwick. He's a consultant neuropsychiatrist. Actually, Peter, what is the difference between a neuropsychiatrist and a psychiatrist?
Neuropsychiatrists deal mainly with the brain. So
I thought that's what psychiatrists dealt with.
No, they deal more with the mind.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, that's an interesting bit, because the mind is something that's not tangible, really, is it? This is what we're talking about, really. The brain is a piece of sort of gooey, fleshy bit. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And if you alter the dirty, fleshy bit,
yeah,
then you get changes in the mind and the structures of the mind, which can be supported by the brain.
Just before we start taking calls, tell me exactly what you, through your research now, what sort of conclusion have you come to yourself that the afterlife is like then? What do you think happens? I mean, is it a long dream state, or is it actually something sort of fairly tangible?
Yes, it's a really interesting question. So you follow the data very closely. Now, one of the things that you learn when you deal with near-death experiences is that there is a cultural view of it. In other words, we have a particularly cultural view. If you go to India, it's slightly different, and so on. But this is only in the front piece of it. As you go deeper into it, then it begins to become more the same. Now, in the people who have gone the furthest, the first thing that happens is that you, as you know, you go down the tunnel, meet the being of life, go into this.
And this happens to everybody, whatever sort of cultural background they come from?
No, there are slight differences.
Yeah.
The tunnel is fairly transcultural. The light is transcultural. The question of emotions are different. Americans tend to see their mothers more than we do. So there are various differences like that. But when you start taking the very deep ones, then you get a change. And what happens is the first part of the deep experiences is people seem to gain information about the world, about the universe, in a way that it's difficult for us chatting here to understand. They feel it very deeply, and they come out with such statements which are difficult to place, like the world is all a unity, everything is one. And then they describe themselves as fragmenting into energy. And in the people who've gone the furthest, they talk about actually fusing with a universal consciousness. And so if you want a path, it's going to go through a rather ordinary but delightful looking world like ours, through a more complex world where forms start to break up through pure energy and pure consciousness and pure love, because love and consciousness are linked together to then fuse with the universal consciousness.
Do we get to the stage like a lot of the great philosophers have, where they suddenly ask the question, are we actually here? Or do we, how do we know we're alive? How do we know we're actually made of, maybe we're just a speck of dust in an even bigger universe, or something along those lines? Is that?
Or maybe it's all a dream.
Exactly.
When you're there, they will say that this life that you're in doesn't have the quality or the reality of the near-death experience. They say that's the realest thing they've ever come across. And the emotions that they experience in it, particularly the emotions of love and joy and peace, are the strongest that they've ever had. So it's a different type of reality.
Now, before we start taking calls, you're interested, you want to hear from people who've had any of these sort of experiences, particularly the 12 hours before you're interested in.
Yeah.
Why is that?
12 hours before is where my current interests are at the moment, because there are a number of things which happen in the 12 hours as you come up to death.
So really you'd like to hear from people who've witnessed loved ones maybe dying and what happened to them in the 12 hours before they died.
Absolutely, yeah. That's exactly it. And if anybody has what are called deathbed coincidences, where the dead person, or at the time of death, seems to have visited somebody outside in the family or somewhere. In other words, they've gained information about the death that they couldn't have gained in any other way except they had been told it by the guy who died, that sort of thing.
And you think that people do in a sort of you think it's 12 hours before somebody dies that this sort of phenomenon actually kicks in?
As far as I can see it from the very limited studies that have been done, and when you talk to people who are carers and who have loved and lost somebody who they loved, then they say they're coming up to death. Usually within the 12 hours, these phenomena start appearing, deathbed visions particularly. A relative comes to take you away and so on.
I mean, a lot of people do, if they now have so much morphine, so many drugs when they're in hospital before they die, it must be very difficult to actually understand what's going on.
It depends. There's certainly going to be cases like that. But there are cases where people are more lucid and clear, and those would be the interesting ones. I mean, obviously, if you're drugged up to your eyeballs, then it's not going to be very helpful at all.
Okay. Jane in Bolton, your first call through to Dr. Fenwick. You're on the air. Hi.
Hi. I'd like to say I've not actually had a personal experience, but my father, he passed away a couple of years ago, and I knew that at the point of him dying, knowing that he was dying anyway, with doctors telling me that he was dying and everything, I actually knew he was dying because he told me quite a few hours before he was going to die. He actually told me that he saw his relatives waiting for him, and I actually knew precisely on the minute when he did die, when I wasn't even at the hospital yet. Also, my mum had an experience. She's dead now. She actually told me of a near-to-death experience she had. I've been reading and studying it for years and years and years, and who's to say when we die that we don't carry on? You discussed a part which got me interested, whereas who's to say, because we can't visibly see, that there's another energy from our body, yeah? Well, I've always believed, with what I've read over the years, that there is another energy which is just on a different level, on a different plane. And with experience I've talked about with people in the past and with experiences with close relatives, I do believe that when you die, you just don't die. I believe we're a shell. Yeah, I do basically believe we're a shell. I do believe that it can all to do with brain chemistry and reactions when you die or just before you die. The main point being is, who's to say that when you do actually die, that you've actually had that experience when you've been properly dead? And it's been known through research for years and years and years. There's been more death experiences, yeah? You know, and...
Jane?
Yeah?
Did you have a question you were going to ask, or were you just going to go and tell me your life story?
No, I was going to... the main point being is, everybody's going on and on about is there existence after death and all that. Well, the main point being is I believe there is.
Thank you. Good, well, I'm glad we got to that. I'm sorry about that. June, who's somewhere in the Medway, you're on the air. Hello, June.
Oh, hi. I've had, some years ago, an out-of-body experience. And I've spoken to quite a few people over the years, and no one's been able to explain it to me to my own satisfaction. So I wondered if the doctor perhaps can do it.
Okay.
Now, this was a summer's day. I was sitting in a car with a friend of mine. The friend was the driver. I was in the front passenger seat. We were discussing a very serious problem. And all of a sudden, I found myself in the back seat, looking at the rear view of the two of us, and I could see we were dressed identically. Everything was just, I really was sitting in the back seat. And this person was doing the talking at the time, and then all of a sudden I went, "Oh," as I obviously came back, and my friend turned to me and said, "Oh, what's the matter?" So she must have heard me go, "Oh," and I just said, oh, nothing. You know, it was so strange to me that I just passed it off and we went on with the conversation. Now, no one has ever been able to, as I say, give me a satisfactory answer, and I wondered if the doctor could.
I could have a go, June. One of the things we know is that there's an area within the brain which generates the body image and generates your picture of yourself. And we know that this area of the brain can alter its function, and in such illnesses as epilepsy, for example, you can have an alteration there so you appear outside your body. Now, this sometimes can occur spontaneously, and it has exactly the characteristics that you described.
Mm-hmm.
You remain, you see yourself, but you also feel that the real self is behind the self that you see, and it's called autoscopy.
Autoscopy?
Yes,
right.
And it doesn't last for very long,
no.
Usually 30 seconds, minute maybe, and then you go back together again with the other person. So I think that's probably what happened in your case.
Well, so what actually happened?
What actually happened was that the areas of the brain which create your body image and where you locate yourself, normally in your body behind your eye, altered, and you were put behind in the car, in the back seat. So it's a trick of the brain.
Right. Now, why then would this have happened? Can you explain that? I mean...
Can I explain why it occurred?
Why did it happen?
Some sort of chemical imbalance, I
Yes.
presume. Is it sort of...
I mean, why did I have that? What caused it? What?
One of the things that you said is that you were talking about something
problem.
which was, a serious problem. The other thing is, what was your childhood like? Were you a happy child?
Happy, but a bit of a nervous disposition.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because these things tend to occur more in people who have been stressed in childhood, have more of a nervous disposition, and then it seems to happen more spontaneously. So I think it was a combination of what you were talking about and your personality which allowed it to happen.
I see. Oh, well, thank you very much.
Okay, nice chatting to you, Jim.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jim. So, is that... I'd never really thought about it, so... but we have this... like an area of the brain that gives a sort of image of ourselves, like a sort of onboard computer screen in our mind.
people would get very cross with me if I said it was an onboard computer screen in the mind, because nowadays the idea of a computer screen in the mind has really gone.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why is that a no-no?
It's a no-no because it means that there is a little person inside our heads looking at a computer screen, organising things, and the way the brain works, it just doesn't work like that. You have different areas which seem to come together, and from that arises.
So where we feel we drive ourselves from, just as you explained very eloquently, I thought, just behind our eyes, because that's where we feel we are, isn't it? Within our heads. We just feel we're just in there behind our eyes.
Absolutely.
But we're not really, are we? We're everywhere.
We're everywhere within the brain, that's certainly true.
So we actually, if you can find a way of working on this bit of the brain that has an idea of what you look like, you could make yourself feel so much better about yourself the whole time. There must be a drug for that somewhere.
There are a lot of drugs for that, I think,
Yes?
One of them's called Prozac.
Oh, that's what Prozac does, isn't it?
Well,
we're going to have to get some of that. I think we'll put Melinda on that as well, without a doubt. We'll take a break. We'll be back with Dr. Peter Fenwick, who is a consultant neuropsychiatrist who is looking for evidence of a life after death. He's been studying this for quite some time. He's interested to talk to anybody who has experienced a near-death experience, if you see what I mean. If you have something you'd like to say, please call us on 08700 40 50 60. If you want to find out more about this, go to our website at talksport.net, and you can also email us if you go there as well. My guest, Dr. Peter Fenwick, is with me, consultant neuropsychiatrist. We're talking about life after death. Let's carry on with the calls. Gary, hang on, no, it's not. It's Ken. Ken in Harlow. Hi, Ken.
Hello there, Dr. Fenwick and James. Right. Two little things, really. I mean, when I was about 18, I had a motorcycle accident, and I can clearly remember looking down on myself lying unconscious on the floor, being attended by the ambulance crew. I suppose I must have been, it appeared that I was hovering about 10, 15 feet above it, completely detached. Had no interest at all in what was going on. It was just a case of thinking, it was like, well, is it worth going back or what? And there was no, it was as if I was making a decision. And the second thing was...
Well, should we get Peter to answer the first thing first?
Yeah, right, okay.
Ken, that's really interesting. Let me ask you some questions about it.
Yeah.
You were hovering above your body. How did you know you were unconscious?
I didn't.
Okay, did you look as if you were unconscious? Or not?
Well, I just was looking down at myself laying on the ground. I had no sense of any feeling at all about myself. It was just total detachment.
Okay.
It was as if I was a different person looking down at somebody else.
Ken, do you think that you were unconscious at that moment?
I definitely was unconscious because I woke up in an ambulance.
Okay, so from your point of view, you were up above yourself,
yes,
and you had no memory of what happened after the accident.
No, I didn't know what happened.
Unconscious.
I didn't know what happened at the time because I was hit I was on a motorbike and I was hit from the side by a car.
Yes,
I didn't know the car was coming.
You see, that's really interesting because that maps onto the sort of work we've been doing in the coronary care unit, where people are clearly totally unconscious, and yet they have this sort of consciousness that you describe. What happened in the second stage?
In that particular, or the second case?
No. What happened in this case? So you were up there looking
in
at
this case, I was just looking down at myself being tended to by the ambulance.
Okay.
And it wasn't until later on, I woke up in hospital. They actually said I had concussion.
Yeah.
I was wearing a crash helmet, luckily.
Yeah.
My crash helmet was completely squashed. And it was actually unbelievable, the shape of the crash helmet after the accident. And I was in hospital for a couple of weeks at least after that. I also broke a leg. And it was only afterwards, when I got out of hospital, that what had actually happened was sort of made clear to me.
Ken, do you remember going back into your body again, or do you just remember being out
I just remember waking up. It was like waking up.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
It was just like waking up.
Yes.
I just woke up in an ambulance, and actually what happened was, as I'd gone off the motorcycle, I'd actually landed on an old lady and I broke her arm, and she was sitting in the ambulance.
You said that you were detached. Were you detached, feeling calm, or were you just detached, or what?
It was very calm.
Yes, that's
very calm.
This is all the first stage of the near-death experience. You feel very calm and tranquil. You leave your body, view whatever it is that's going on there, but you didn't go on down the tunnel, which would
No,
be the next stage.
it was, as I said, it was a feeling of, well, you know, is it worth going back? You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't even as if I felt that, but it was.
Yes, but
afterwards, trying to rationalise it, that's how I felt, and I think it's a bit like the
you felt
person
that you had a choice, in fact.
Yeah, and I think it was like the person that said
Yes.
earlier. It was like you're in a shell. It's like I'm in a car at the moment. I can leave the engine running and I can get out of the car. Once I'm out of the car, I'm not driving that car anymore, but it's still got the engine running. It's a bit like that.
So,
I think,
Ken,
with
you
the
said
human body.
You think that mind and brain are not the same, do you?
I think I think that there are two very. I think there's a very good case for us having what by any other name would be a soul. And whether that's, and this leads me to my second case, if you're interested in that.
Go on.
Well, my mother died when she was in her 70s, and she was unconscious for quite a long while. She had lots and lots of things go wrong with heart trouble and kidney failure and all sorts, and she was lying in a hospital bed. Now, we stood with her and sat with her in this time that she was dying, and she was semi-conscious. I mean, she was moving, and she was not actually. She didn't actually speak, but she was moving, and she was moving her lips, and she was extremely weak.
Yes.
All of a sudden, she sat upright in the bed.
Yes.
She opened her eyes.
Yes.
And she raised her head,
Yes.
looked upwards, and she raised her hands and arms upwards.
Yes.
And she went, "Oh!" And it was just as if she had seen somebody.
Yeah.
It was as if she had seen somebody that she recognised. And she was like that for, I would say, 2 seconds. And she just went, "Oh!" And she collapsed back into the bed. And she didn't move again, although her body was breathing and her body was to all intents and purposes, her body was still working. And very shortly afterwards, she did pass away.
Ken, that's really interesting, because you give a wonderful description there of a feature which is often reported, and it's just before death. Many people do suddenly sit up, usually with very strong positive emotion, as if they're welcoming somebody, just like your mum did. And people who aren't quite so close to death as your mum also report that, because they're actually able to tell the person who's sitting at the deathbed that there is a relative of theirs of some sort who's come to collect them. And so I think that is all part of the deathbed vision. That's really a lovely story. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Right. Peter, tell me, how do we know? I mean, I asked you the same question right at the beginning, but it's one that keeps coming back to me. How do we know, though, that this isn't just the body's way of making you feel all right? I mean, you know how nature is so good at helping sort of cure all sorts of things and fighting pain in its own way, and all the sorts of things that the body is equipped with to stop hurt and being attacked and everything else. How do we know this isn't just one of those fail-safes kicking in?
I think in the case that we've been talking about, in which you have deathbed visions, you can't say that it isn't, because the person's brain is apparently functioning. You can argue that it could be distorted in some way, and this is producing those effects. Now, you can't argue that it isn't. So that's why we went to the coronary care unit, where the person is unconscious and has these experiences. Now, if you accept that those experiences, when you're unconscious, are specific in some way, and if you can then show that there is a direct chain of causation or chain of similarity just before death to the near-death experience, then you can start arguing that maybe our ideas of these just being a distorted brain may in fact be wrong. So one can then start looking at the similarity of the evidence before.
Apart from the interest in everybody wanting to know whether there's an existence outside the physical one, is there any other kind of reason that the medical profession is now becoming interested in the difference between the mind and the brain?
Oh, it's an absolutely fundamental question at the moment. It's a slightly difficult explanation, but I'll have a go at it. And
Okay.
stop me when
I'm bored or I don't understand it. Okay, go.
It goes very back to the sort of science which we're using, and you have to go back now to the time of Galileo and Descartes. What Galileo said is that if you think of the world, it consists of two sorts of qualities, primary qualities, which are things like mass, weight. These can all be represented mathematically, and secondary qualities, which are subjective, things like love, redness, and so on. He said our science is a primary quality science. So we deal only with the outside world. And if I was to say to you that we have a dead matter universe, in other words, nobody would think that matter was alive in any sense. That is a Galilean way. It's the science which is born of the Reformation, the Age of Enlightenment, and so on. Now, with our new science, which has occurred recently, postmodern science, we don't argue from only Galileo's primary qualities. What we can say is that maybe the universe itself is conscious, which is forbidden in Galilean science. So if the universe is conscious, then maybe our whole view of ourselves is in fact limited. And it's really like what's happened in physics. You go from mechanical physics or Newtonian mechanics to quantum mechanics. And what happens in quantum mechanics is that individual particles are distributed widely. And so it may be with our ideas about subjectivity and consciousness, and that is that in fact consciousness is part of the world, part of the universe.
How important, therefore, do you think it has been to go back in time and investigate some of the older civilizations who seem to have a far more spiritual view of themselves and the world?
Well, I think it's very important because then you get cross-cultural studies. And the other point which is important is that you see different ways or different views of the universe. And what has come up now is that our Galilean science is only one form of science. It's only one way of looking at the universe. Now, if you take a different way of looking at the universe, then the idea of consciousness outside the brain is not so foreign. So these ideas are coming up, and this is in answer to your question, is consciousness important? The idea is yes.
Now, we talked, and I've forgotten, Ash will remind me, we talked to somebody who told us, do you remember we were often...
Ron Pearson.
Ron Pearson, wasn't it? Who I don't know if you've heard of this man, and anyway, he has... Is it him, or is it...
Yeah, he was the engineer, the World War II engineer guy.
Who came up with a mathematical equation that proved the existence after death. Which was rather interesting, but left...
Mathematical repeatable experiment.
Exactly, yes, but we didn't understand it. But it basically shows that all human... You'll think about it and you'll come back to us, won't you? Right. Don't go away. Back after the break with more calls for Dr. Peter Fenwick. Okay, welcome back to the James Well Radio Show tonight. We delve into the next life, if in fact there is one. Consultant neuropsychiatrist Dr. Peter Fenwick is with me. He's written a number of articles and has been investigating the possibility of this. As far as your investigations, Peter, are concerned, how convinced are you now that there is another existence?
If you follow the data, then the data is suggestive of it. Whether there is or not, of course, one can't actually tell, because by the time you're dead, you never come back. But
although I mean, listen, we talk to people on this show who reckon that they are in constant contact with people who've gone to the other side.
Well, certainly if you do a study of the number of times people whose husbands or wives have died, you can show that in the 2 years after death, they frequently see the departed spouse fairly frequently. And there are a number of studies looking at this. But then the question is really whether this is something which is seen in the mind or whether it's indicative of an afterlife.
Gary in Edinburgh, you're on the air. Hi.
Oh, hiya, James. Hello, Dr. Fenwick as well.
Hi, James.
I just want to ask you if you'd considered putting the whole question of astral travel as part of your study, because there are people that can apparently do this at will, or claim they can. Anyway.
Yeah, Gary, this is, it's a really interesting field. It's a very difficult field. It's not one that I've got into. I've looked at the literature as there is on this, and one of the things that people say about the astral plane is that it doesn't communicate with this world. Now, if you have people traveling on a plane, and the only indication that of their travel is what they say, then it's actually very difficult to draw conclusions from that. So it's something which I haven't looked into with any degree of depth.
Sure.
Sorry about that, Gary.
All right. No, it's just that I heard that there was a hospital, possibly in London somewhere, that in its operating theatre, they'd placed some particular logo that could only be seen from the ceiling.
Oh yeah, now that's a different matter.
Yeah.
But let's skip astral travel then, and let's talk about the idea of logos on ceilings, etc. Now, we've certainly been involved in that in a hospital in this country.
What is the idea of that?
The idea is, do you remember we had, I think it was it Ken? Yes, I think it was, who said that at the time of his accident, he was above himself looking down on his unconscious body. Well, in people who have near-death experiences in a coronary care unit, a proportion of them will go up to the ceiling and see the resuscitation process. So if you put these symbols up on the ceiling where they can only be seen by the person if he was up on the ceiling, then that would enable you to see whether or not they truly could see something.
Has anybody ever seen them?
We haven't had anybody who's actually done that. In all our near-death experiences, nobody left their body and went up to the corner of the ceiling. What we want now is to extend the research into a number of different hospitals and do exactly the same thing again and wait.
All right.
There's been one case in Swansea where in an intensive care unit, one of the nurses there has been doing her PhD on near-death experiences, and she put symbols on the monitor, the cardiac monitor, you know, all those things with the traces on it and things. Well, she put symbols on top of that so they couldn't be seen by the resuscitation team, but they could be seen by anybody who left their body. She had somebody leave her body, so now you're waiting. Come on, what is it going to show? Well, it wasn't quite like that, unfortunately, because he wasn't, the guy who'd left his body was only looking at the resuscitation process and didn't look at the monitor, so he never saw it. So that's the only case we've had.
Thank you, Gary.
Cheers, mate.
Okay, bye-bye. Wilfred in County Down. Yes, Wilfred.
Very good evening, James.
Hi, Wilfred.
And good evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
Could you tell me, of all the patients that you've had who've reported these death experiences, have you had any that have reported bad experiences about going to, as people would call it, the other place? Because I've read in articles about people who have experienced this. Have you?
Wilfred, about in 1988, I was taking part in a television program. It's probably the program which made near-death experiences much more widely known in this country. And we got over 2,000 letters. And of those, we took 500, which we felt people had the most typical near-death experiences, and got them to fill in a questionnaire. So if you take that as a sample, then 4% of the people, that 500, had negative experiences.
When you say negative, what do you mean by negative?
I'll give you an example. One woman described how she was walking across a very slippery pole over a deep pit, and the deep pit was a very frightening pit, and hands were coming up to try and pull her down into the pit. And that was more or less what her experience was. So
had she been a bad person, though?
No, I don't think she'd been, well, certainly no worse than me, anyway. No, I think what the negative experiences are is that they are essentially confusional. They're not on the same dimension as the near-death experiences, and I have additional evidence to support that. We've been talking to people in intensive care units, and we've been talking to a group up in the north of England, and they have a lot of experiences. And in intensive care units, you get a lot of negative experiences. They're all essentially confusional. and the people are also very paranoid and frightened and feel that people are coming to harm them and so on.
It's an interesting point, though, isn't it, that Wilfred brings up, because everybody that talks about a near-death experience, all the ones I've ever spoken to, all speak about this wonderful white light and feeling of that. You never hear from people who are going to this place of burning torment or whatever.
I think that's interesting. In our study, there was one person who may have had a negative experience, but he wouldn't talk about it. And this question of not talking about it, I think, is very real. I mean, particularly if you do think about people who write letters about their experience, are you really going to write a letter saying that the devil had been around and had got his eyes on you? I mean, you're not going to do that. And also, if it's frightening, you're not going to do it. There's been another study from Holland in which they had 360, I think, near-death experiences and no negative ones. So I think they're rare and I think they're different.
Okay. Wilfred, thank you very much indeed. Doctor, can you stay with us for a bit more?
Sure.
Okay. If you've got a question for Dr. Peter Fenwick, if you have had a near-death experience, if you would like to ask him a question about this, it seems interesting now that the medical profession are now beginning to investigate the difference between the mind and the brain. It seems received wisdom, I suppose, now that there is a difference. Until recently, I don't think anybody would have said, oh, yes, there's a difference between the mind and the brain, but now people are beginning
asking
the question and investigating it. Join us again after the news.
Talk Sport.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Right, welcome to the show. I'm speaking tonight with Dr. Peter Fenwick, the consultant neuropsychiatrist, who you may have read about in some of the newspapers, who has been investigating whether or not there is life after death. He is beginning to believe that there probably is some sort of existence in the mind. Let's spend just a few minutes before we take some more calls. The lines are open if you want to call us, 08700 40 50 60. What do you think with your investigation? I mean, is there anything tangible, any tangible way, or doesn't it need any sort of description as to what the mind is? Is it just a collection of, I mean, is it just like a radio wave, something that, you know, we know is there, but you can't see it, you can't actually describe it?
Well, one of the things that neuroscience has shown is that the mind is composed of a whole set of different functions. For example, there's a hearing function, a speaking function, seeing function. The thinking function is fractionated into different things like the verbal component or the spatial component. And then you have different sorts of memory, working memory, long-term memory, and so on. So the whole thing is a bundle of different functions. And what we perceive from our own view are all these functions coming together and forming a global unity, which we call the mind.
I mean, it's a fascinating thing to do. I mean, if you actually ever do scientifically discover that there's a life after death, and where it is and what it's like and everything else, and if there is something to be discovered, presumably one day science will discover it, it'll actually give us no more reason to exist. If you see what I mean.
In one sense, yes. Because one would know that what one is experiencing here is only part of the totality of experience. But funnily enough, the knowledge that you have of that, or may have of that, doesn't alter the way you behave. Let me take some examples. There are a whole set of experiences known as mystical experiences. These are experiences which come on people quite often for no reason at all, in which they feel that they become one with the universe, and the universe they become one with in these experiences is very clear. It's composed of universal love, and they feel that it's a unity, a wholeness, and they're all part of the whole. So if you have these experiences, you might say...
You do realize that you're just completely destroying the 60s experience here, that we all thought in the 60s we had discovered for the first time, and it was something new and different. You are actually now completely rubbishing this.
Well, not rubbishing it, but merely saying that other people had discovered it before, and that these can occur spontaneously.
And every time we have one of these wonderful warm feelings and love and everything else and think that we are in some way a unique human being, you're now telling me this is a well-documented medical fact and you've heard about it before.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's not only the 60s. But the interesting point about it is that if you have one of these experiences, it doesn't necessarily change the way that you behave in this world. In other words, the knowledge that you're part of the unity, part of a much greater whole, doesn't alter the way that you behave. You become more spiritual.
Sure.
You become more social, more concerned for other people, but it doesn't, on the whole, change the way you behave. So
we wouldn't have people jumping off buildings if they knew that there was another existence they could go to.
That's really interesting. Now, I don't think so, because I think that the way that we're constructed, it tends to stop us jumping off buildings. We're still very afraid of it, and even if it was 100% certain, it depends on the quality and nature of the certainty.
Do you have any feeling about God while you're doing these investigations, or is God something that doesn't come into your thought pattern at all?
God is, you take it from how people who have the experiences report it, and they report being in the light, and the light is pure love, clear consciousness, very supportive, very helpful. It's also all-knowing, and so that's probably about the closest sort of description you can get to it. The other description is that it's pure energy, pure consciousness. So those are the types of descriptions you get of God.
Okay. Talking about going back to the 60s, well, you're smirking at me. What's wrong?
No, nothing. She just thought Doris Stokes had called in.
Doris Stokes had called in.
Yeah, but it's Dottin Stokes.
Yeah. You know, you should never take your wife to work, honestly. Just because she's not well enough to go to the table dancing club this evening, and she's have to come in with me. There we are. Look, Jimmy Percy, one-time frontman of Sham 69, is on the line again. Jimmy, good evening to you.
How are you, Jimmy?
I'm very good.
I'm really terrible. I've got the flu like most of the country at the moment. Apart from the snow, farmers in chains and the most horrible situations going on around us at this moment of time. It's quite weird you've got a conversation going on here, whereas one thing I want to ask the doctor, there was a theory that basically in situations whereas if you die and you still have the life being inside of you, in other words, that the heart might give in, but there might be enough oxygen in the brain to last 20 minutes. Now, in a lot of those situations, that's where people predominantly see their life going before them, because if you think when you dream, most of those dreams only happen between 1 second and 7 seconds. So put that inside 20 minutes. So in other words, lots of people that die suffocating, for instance, or drowning, there are predominantly lots of people that see their life go before them. Now, the oddest thing about life is, when you're talking about mind and body or soul, as it were, in the distinction between whereas your brain leads down to the part of your neck which is like a transmitter, the rest of the nervous system. And that's the one thing that makes us look like a monkey, for instance. And recently the monkey that's been cloned is called Andy, which is insemination by DNA. And with Stanley Kubrick wanting to make his last film, A and I, which is artificial intelligence. At the same time, we're all talking and living a life that is balanced between the two things now anyway, one of emotion and one of technical being. So the question I want to ask you is, in most of those states of mind, in other words, we're predominantly in two states of mind now anyway. In other words, it's animal instinct and alien intelligence is what really human beings now are. They're trapped in between these two things of primevally being of a soul, and where does that soul come from? And at the same time looking at the stars and looking at Mars and wherever for the information that we've already know now on this planet. There's a search outside of us and a search inside of our soul.
Okay, Jimmy, let me just try some of those. There are a whole set of things there, but let's start where you began. And what you were doing was you were talking about dreams, and you were saying dreams last for 7 seconds. No, that's not true.
Make one.
What we know is that there are two phases of sleep, what's called slow-wave sleep, in which the dreams are mainly kinesthetic and verbal. That means sort of feelings and words. And there are the rapid eye movement phase of sleep when your eyes flick from side to side. And that's accompanied by dreaming as you and I know it. These are narrative dreams where you tell a story, they're visuospatial, etc. Now, 25%, that's a quarter of the night, is spent with these dreams. So it's not just sort of 7 seconds. They go on for a very long time. And so you can't use dreaming to talk about the similarity with life reviews, because they're different things. Now, to come back to dreaming and life reviews again, in dreaming, you need a whole set of physiological functions in order to support dreaming. You've got to have a functioning brain. A brain which is unconscious won't support dreaming. So in the life review that you get in some patients who are drowning, and their true near-death experiences, and they're unconscious, you can't use a dreaming mechanism because those structures which support dreaming are just not functioning. So it's something different.
When you're in a coma, I've often wondered, I mean, people who are in comas and actually have some kind of realization of what's going on around them, when they wake up they can say, well, I know that so-and-so came to see me, or this happened, or that happened, or anything else. Then you can be sure that maybe people in comas don't dream, or do they dream?
It depends entirely upon the coma and which part of the brain is damaged. In people who have what's called the locked-in syndrome, they can't speak, they can't say anything, but yet they have a relatively normal brain functioning locked into this physical case, which they can't move or do anything with, and they develop sleeping rhythms, yeah.
Okay.
So they can do.
Jimmy, thank you for your call, my friend.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Keep warm in this cold and nasty weather. Ash, you wanted to ask a question.
I've just got one question on...
Now, take it just that I know you were going to be a brain surgeon, but please just...
Well, I do actually dabble in a bit of brain surgery in my own bedroom sometimes.
Self-trepanning is about as far as you go.
Yeah. But Michael, is it lysozymes, what it's called, the enzymes that break down the brain after 10 minutes? Or so?
Well, I think there are a whole set of...
He's showing off now.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to know, Ross, you say it doesn't happen until 6 minutes or whatever.
10, actually. I wish
10 minutes. But there's obviously some sort of device that knows that, 3 minutes... It obviously times to 10 minutes because it wouldn't know 10 minutes had gone. So obviously this is a process that the person has never been through before, because they wouldn't have had a near-death experience.
But that's the same process that your body decides to decay after about 5 or 6 hours or something.
No, but this is within the first 5 minutes. This thing has never happened to you before. So maybe there's some sort of process going on within those 6 minutes that is causing this odd memory.
Yes, that's one of the theories. And that theory is a perfectly good and valid theory, and there are a whole lot of subsets to that. For example, people will say, well, the near-death experiences are caused by lack of oxygen, or they'll say they're caused by too much carbon dioxide, and you can get a bit more technical, and you can say that they're caused by something which is called the NMDA receptor. That's one of the excitatory neurotransmitters in the brain. So there are lots of these theories, and some people say they're even caused by little seizures in different parts of the brain. Now, all those theories are fine if the brain is functioning, but if the brain is not functioning, as it doesn't when you drop the blood pressure so that no oxygen goes to the brain, after 10 seconds you can show that the brain becomes electrically silent. Therefore, none of these theories will hold, because the brain is actually dysfunctional at that time. So the idea that this is a special condition is an interesting one, but you won't have memory circuits even to remember the special condition, do you see? The only way that I can help you using our current science is to say, if you look back on an unconscious brain, then what you see, looking back at unconsciousness, what you see is a near-death experience, but it's a little difficult to try and get that out of it.
But there's no physiological changes at all, you're saying, and no physiological activity?
There's no physiological activity. After about 10 seconds, the recorded electrical activity on the surface of the scalp goes to zero. And one of the things we know about that is that if it's zero on the scalp, it's zero inside.
Okay.
I'll go back to my experiments.
I think you should.
Yeah.
Actually, well, I'm talking about trepanning, which is something we did on the show not long ago. Just as I have a fascination for it, I have to tell you. But no, there were people in America, I think there are, who do it to themselves. People who don't know, but trepanning is the practice of drilling holes in your head. No, I'm not kidding. Apparently, some people feel that drilling holes in their heads lets pressure out that builds up around the brain. And it's not
infection, then.
But it's not widely done now, is it?
No.
But it used to be.
It used to be. It used to be the only treatment for severe, prolonged headaches.
And certain parts of the world, obviously America, it's always America. There seems to be views that this is a good thing for people to do. I can't believe it.
I couldn't believe that either. I would be very much against it.
I'm not surprised. Tricia in London, I don't know why I brought it up really. Tricia in London, you're on the air. Hi.
Good evening. Hello, Doctor.
Hi, Tricia.
Something has puzzled me, and I'm so glad I've got a chance to speak to you. I lost my son of 16 with leukemia, and they told me 3 days before he died that they tried a new drug on him, and it had poisoned his whole system.
Yes.
And they did tell me he had 3 days, and that was it. He would die within 3 days. Now, I didn't know at that stage what diamorphine was, or, anything that they would be giving this drug to my child. I didn't realize all this till years later.
Yes.
Something peculiar happened 1 hour and 20 minutes before his death.
Yeah.
I was in the room with him, and he had some of his friends in the room. He had his hand in, I think he was getting the drip, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
1 hour and 20 minutes before he died, his hand went from back to forth in front of his eyes like he was trying to ward off something that was bothering him. And he kept doing this movement back and forth. It was like he was trying to block whatever was coming in front of his face. And I assumed that he didn't want his friends there.
Yeah.
Silly me, not thinking at this stage. And I told his friends to go out of the room.
Yes.
And this has puzzled me, Doctor, for all these years. What was he trying to ward off in front of his face? Because after that, his hands went down. And I actually, because he died 1 hour and 20 minutes later, because this was at 10 o'clock, and he died at 11:20. And I was with him at that stage. I asked the priest to come in. I don't know why, because since then I didn't believe in nothing. But at that stage, I heard him gasp his three breaths.
Yes.
And I automatically, on the third breath, put my mouth on top of his and said something. I gave you life. I'd like your last breath. But that's not the issue. The issue was I'm troubled at what he was trying to shake off in front of his face. It's like he could have been seeing his life go in front of him. I don't know.
I think probably one will never know the answer to that. The possibilities are that if he was really very ill indeed and his consciousness wasn't clear, then he could well have been confused. In other words, this will have been a confusional memory of some sort. So it's possible it was a confusional state that he had. In the near-death visions, in the studies which have been done on them, this is in the visions which come just before death, on the whole, they tend to be ones that the person welcomes. In other words, they're visions of people who they know and so on. So I think probably the most likely thing that it was confusional on the part of your sons rather than relating to anything on the near-death vision spectrum.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Tricia. We'll be back right after this.
James Well.
Watch for the tingling in your hair. I can assure you, she is on the job, so to speak, and you're going to enter. And I say it with respect. But I'm also getting, if I may say, with respect, you've got a lady coming here as well. And this lady, please, is trying to manifest next to me. And he loves the bones of you, and he's blowing you a spiritual kiss. So you're getting a mutual spiritual kiss. Heavy-set fat man. Heavy-set fat man. Heavy-set fat man. And I say it with respect.
There we are. Dr. Peter Fenwick and I were just discussing how quickly everybody wants to get you out of hospital these days. He's telling me if we had a triple bypass in America, they'd have you home in 4 days. Amazing.
Takes you more than that to get a bed here.
Yes, you'd actually still be in the corridor waiting, wouldn't you? Right, let's carry on. Gordon in Glasgow. Hi, Gordon, you're on the air.
Hello, yeah, I wondered when you were going to get to it. Nearly an hour I've been waiting.
Sorry about that, Gordon.
Anyway, I wonder if the doctor had heard of Carl Gustav Jung. He has a very interesting description of a near-death experience that he had in 1944.
Carl Gustav Jung?
Yeah, the Swiss psychologist. He was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud.
Oh, yeah.
He had a disagreement about points of view.
Yeah.
He talks about how he seemed to be high up in space, looking back at the Earth, and later on I discovered that he was approximately 1,000 miles out in space. And he gives this is before space travel, you know, and he gives quite a vivid description of the Earth in space. And then he says he saw, it seems to me that he saw a short distance away, I saw in space a tremendous dark block of stone like a meteorite. It was about the size of my house, or even bigger. It was floating in space, I myself was floating in space. I'd seen similar stones on the coast of the Gulf of Bengal. And then he says, as I approached the steps leading up to the entrance of this block, a strange thing happened. I had the feeling that everything was being sloughed away, everything I aimed at or wished for or thought, the whole phantasmagoria of earthly existence fell away or was stripped from me. An extremely painful process. Nevertheless, something remained. It was as if I now carried along with me everything I had experienced or done, everything that had happened around me. And he sort of goes on about this, and how he had sort of several mystical experiences in the hospital as well.
Have you ever heard of him, Peter?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So not only did he have an out-of-body experience, but he had an out-of-world experience.
Out-of-world experiences are much rarer these days than just straight out-of-body experiences. But the point about that experience, which was interesting, is everything being stripped away, really, apart from the things that he had done for his memory. And this is one of the things about the near-death experiences, is they're terribly moral. And if you are in the light, you tend to see everything you've done and judge it yourself. And just imagine being held in universal love and looking at all those things that you've done. You tend to be a bit critical of yourself, but nobody else judges you. You judge yourself. And so they are very moral experiences. But the other point which has come through, both in what Gordon was saying and in near-death experiences, is that you are responsible for absolutely everything you've done. So whatever you've done, you're responsible for. And that's really quite a different view.
Okay. Thank you, Gordon. Let's go to Dot, who's in Stoke-on-Trent. Hi, Dot.
Hi.
Hi, Dot.
Hello, Dr. Fenwick, isn't it?
Yes, Dot.
Yeah. Probably answer some of my questions. I've always had funny experiences ever since I've been 4 years out of age, yeah?
Yes.
So I've always thought they're all my friends, yeah?
Yes.
So, I have out of the body. I can go out to my body, and I usually, well, a friend rang me the other week and said, can you go up intensive care, see my husband? I said, yeah, I'll go at night. I said, but just let me check. So I goes out my body, and I said, it's a fourth bed on the left-hand side. I said, fine, I'll do it in the evening, like, in the night.
And so, when you did this, where were you? You were at home?
I'm in bed, yeah.
And so you then nip out of your body?
I nip out of my body.
Go along to intensive care?
Yeah.
See where they are?
I go, see where they are,
Wow.
And I came back and I said to my friend...
You're not talking to another psychiatrist of any sort, of...
No, it's a lovely feeling. Anyway...
Hang on a minute, Doc, hang on. So what am I supposed to believe here? That on command, you can actually... Listen a minute. You can actually leave your body and go off and see things and come back. And you have actual proof. You can prove.
I can prove I've done it, Well, actually, I said to the young girl, I said, well, I'll go tonight, so give me a ring tomorrow and I'll let you know. Anyhow, I went there and I came back. Oh, when I went there, I stood at the bottom of the bed and there was this young girl with a black ponytail with a white band round.
Hang on, when you went there, was this out of body or in body?
No, out of body.
Oh, right, out of body,
body.
But Dot, if you can do this at will, I mean, could you come into the studio now and tell me what sort of pen I'm holding? I mean, could you do that?
Well, that lady I was going to ask for, the pen you're holding.
Well, I tell you what, if I leave you here for a moment on the line, all right, don't put your phone down. If I leave this line open, can you actually get yourself into the studio here?
I've never done it while I'm awake. I've always done it when I go to sleep.
Oh,
now, like he says, it is... Well, I've only done it once. I've left the house and gone to... Well, anyway, I said to the young girl, I said to the girl...
Hang on. I thought you could do this at will.
Well, I did it at will that time,
Yeah,
but I am helping him as a friend to go.
No, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in whether you can do this or not.
Yeah, I can do it.
Well, come over here then.
Well, not at the moment, let me say. Well, Ashley's at the left of you.
I beg your pardon?
Ashley's sitting at the left of you.
No, he's not.
Well, the room's at the left of...
The room's at the left of me?
There's a room at the left of you, And there's one at the right.
Yeah.
Windows.
Charlatan is the word I'm looking for. Sorry about that.
Window on your left.
No, I mean, honestly, but, do you get a lot of this when your people... I mean, she probably believes she can do it. That's the thing. But if there's anybody out there who actually believes that they can go in and out of their body, you'd like to meet them, wouldn't you?
Oh, I certainly would, yeah.
I mean, let me just give you another number as well, because Peter Fenwick is continually researching out-of-body experiences and life after death. The Horizon Research Foundation has been set up to collate information. And if you'd like to get information about it, or if you'd like to help them in some way, ring this number, not now, obviously, but tomorrow, 0870 33 33 722. That's 0870 33 33 722. And they will tell you more there. And if you want to find out if you didn't get that, go to our website at talksport.net. Right, where were we going to go? We got some emails here. Listen, let's go to Chris. You've got some emails there. Was there another one that you wanted to answer just before we carried on?
Yes, there's one here from it's from Liam, and he says, could you explain why only some people have a near-death experience? And then he says, could it be that the people who had a near-death experience believed in it, so that's why they had it? And this is a very interesting question, because if you take the study which we did, everybody who had a cardiac arrest had exactly the same resuscitation protocol. So we know they had the same drugs, they had the same procedures, everything was the same. So the question then is, why do only some people get it? And it looks as if, not from our study, but from other studies, that you get it if you're younger. You get it if you have foreknowledge of it, although this isn't absolutely necessary. And those are the main factors. There's been another study done on a retrospective study. These are people who've had it but who weren't expecting them to have it, etc. And they seem to be able to what's called dissociate, that is, split bits of their mind off rather more easily than people who don't. So those are the major factors which indicate people who are going to have it.
Joe's emailed us from London. He says, what's to say people who supposedly have these near-death experiences are not just vivid hallucinationists, as when your brain is starved of oxygen, you hallucinate. Therefore, due to the movies and also all the many stories you hear, your brain just replays those thoughts as reality.
I like that. It's really a very good question, and one which needs to be answered and answered firmly. Now, the point about that is that the near-death experience, by definition, is a hallucination. It's a hallucination because we don't know that these people are really there. So, is this just caused by lack of oxygen, etc.? This is why we chose the coronary thrombosis or the heart-stopping one, because we know then the brain function is down. So you can't say that it's due to lack of oxygen, due to any of these things, because the brain is non-functional. But also, I think, rather more important than that, lack of oxygen doesn't produce clear experiences. They're all confusional. And a lot of these things have got into the literature because they've been thought up by people who haven't actually dealt with people who are in coronary care units, who are intensive care units. And so it's easy to say, well, it's due to lack of oxygen. But in fact, lack of oxygen confuses you. So it's very unlikely to be that. So these are clear, lucid experiences taking place when you're unconscious, and that's the problem.
Okay. Johnny from Gateshead, Tyner Weir, emails us, he says, did you know that whilst asleep the body is approximately 2 ounces lighter? This occurs because the ether, that's the astral body or soul, weighs 2 ounces, and it separates whilst you sleep from the body, thus the weight loss. Also, when you die, the body weighs 2 ounces less.
Well, the answer to that is wow.
No, I mean, do you think that that's rubbish? If so, say so.
I don't have any data on it.
Okay.
I'd love to know what his source was and whether people had actually done it. I've worked in sleep laboratories, but I must say that we've never actually weighed anybody when they're asleep.
Well, you have to try that now, see if they weigh less when they're asleep.
Well, they certainly will do, because you know that most people die in the night. And most people die in the night because what happens is that you don't drink during the night, you become dehydrated. And so one of the arguments for people dying at night is that you get a relative dehydration and therefore you become hypovolemic. In other words, your blood volume decreases, and this is one of the causes of death. So in that sense, you'll certainly progressively weigh less and less as the night goes on.
Okay, so you can't find out whether the soul is there by weighing it, you don't think?
I haven't seen any convincing evidence.
It's a nice idea, though.
Nice idea.
I don't know whether to read this one. In fact, it comes from Lynn, who says, if you had mentioned the doctor was a psychiatrist, I would have probably kept my big mouth shut. It wasn't me. Still, it is definite progress that a psyche is considering these things without calling the sectioning committee. I think she's having a go at psychiatrists here. Has he spoken to any Hell's Angels about their near-death experiences? Some of them are preachers now. Oh, I see, right.
Oh, yes, I think this is a question about do people who have near-death experiences change after the near-death experience? Now, there's been a very nice study done on this in Holland, and it's an 8-year study, so the follow-up is actually very good. And what they did is they compared people who'd had a coronary thrombosis and no near-death experience, and people who'd had a near-death experience, and compared them to the group that hadn't had one. And what they found was that after a near-death experience, 8 years down the line, you are much more likely to be more spiritual, more concerned for other people, and so on. So yes, it does change you.
Okay. Let's go back to the calls. Scott is in Birmingham. Scott, you're on the air. Hi.
Yes, good evening, James.
Yes, Scott.
I'd just like to speak. Good evening, Doctor.
Hi, good evening.
I'd just like to ask you a question. Unfortunately, I was with my father. My father died on Monday evening. I was with him on my own. It was a very traumatic experience in hospital. He suffered terribly during the night, and he had a cardiac arrest at the end of his life. And I held his hand and held him close to me. And he seemed to go through an extremely sort of traumatic experience, you know, with he went purple in the face and so on and so forth. Yeah. And I found that extremely worrying to me because he seemed in such distress.
Yes.
And I find it, from what you say, I mean, it's rather comforting in one respect, in the fact that you're saying that, you know, we could possibly have some sort of existence after that experience. I just wonder, purely on a sort of personal basis, what you would say to me with regards to the fact that, you know, going through that, there is something follows on from that, if you understand me.
Yes, I do understand you, and I understand you perfectly. Not only that, I do appreciate the pain and the difficulty that
Yes,
you've gone
thank you.
through
Thank you.
when you were with your dad.
Yes, he was a wonderful man, wonderful man.
I think that the answer is something like this. If you were in a coronary care unit and somebody's heart stopped, then you would see many of the same features that you saw with your dad.
Yes.
You'd see them become deeply unconscious, you'd see them go blue, you'd see them apparently being very distressed by the whole process of having no oxygen to their brain.
Yes.
And yet, when these people are resuscitated, they do describe these experiences. So even though your dad was going through what appears from the outside to be absolutely horrendous, the inside, there does seem to be, in some people, the fact that consciousness continues.
Right.
So I think that's really what the message is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that got to me more than ever is that I was on my own with him, and he clutched my hand and he said how much he loved us and myself and my brother. And, you know, that obviously that's a traumatic experience in itself.
Yes, indeed.
But when he went into this sort of... he had renal failure and all sorts of things, problems at the end. And I found it so distressing in the respect that I could see he had this enormous sort of heart attack at the end. You know, and I found it to be unbearable in one respect. But it is comforting to know that... I mean, I admire what you say. I do believe what you say, that you know, there's something on the other side of this, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I do. And I think the important thing there is that although from you on the outside, it appeared that he was suffering enormously when he had his heart attack, from his point of view, he'll have gone unconscious very quickly. And then if he was going to go on, he'd have done so.
Scott, thank you very much indeed for your call. Nigel Howell has emailed us from Mansfield. This is unusual, interesting. He said, I've never had a near-death experience myself. However, my mum died in 1997, and her eyes were half open. I can remember looking into her eyes and seeing what looked like a green, floating, distorting sort of shape. And I'd like to hear your views on what it was that I saw. Was it the plane of existence where the dead exist, or something else?
Nigel, the answer to your question is that one, of course, can't be certain. What one can say is that when your mum was dying, it will have been a very emotional time for you. And when you've been looking into your mum's eyes, then you will have been particularly sensitive. And I suspect it was within the relationship between you and your mum what you saw. Whether one can talk about planes of existence or anything like that beyond it, I don't know. I think what I would have to do is to take what your feelings were as the most likely example of what it actually was.
Okay. It's been fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. And you will, I'm sure, continue on with your investigations. If people would like to help this, the Horizon Research Foundation has been set up to collate information. If you feel you could help them, the number to call is 0870 3333 722. Dr. Peter Fenwick, thank you very much indeed. We're back tomorrow morning, or this morning, between 5 and 6. And then again tonight at 10, our guest will be Rabbi Shmuley Botek. Oh, good. I think also, is it Ian Collins tonight, or is it the...
yes, I think it is.
It is, because you never know, and they never come close. So Ian Collins is next. We'll be back at 5. See you then.
On 1089 and 10:53 a.m, Talk Sport. On the hour, sports update and headline news from...